The European Maritime, Fisheries and Aquaculture Fund is an EU fund which is allocated to Member States to implement actions under their adopted programmes covering the period 2021 to 2027. The actions contained in the programmes will contribute to fulfilling the objectives of the Common Fisheries Policy, the EU Maritime Policy and the EU Agenda for International Ocean Governance. This will also fulfil the objectives outlined in the EU Green Deal, which is a roadmap plan for EU environmental and climate policies.
In order for seafood production to be sustainable, it's important that not only is the resource carefully managed, but also the impacts of harvesting that resource on the wider ecosystem, including biodiversity, is considered. The Biodiversity Programme helps provide the evidence and science basis to support the implementation of the Common Fisheries Policy, which also aims towards sustainable seafood production. This ultimately means that Ireland develops seafood production in a way that protects and restores biodiversity.
The EMFAF Marine Knowledge Scheme includes actions that will improve our knowledge about the state of the marine environment, and it will improve our knowledge about activities that happen in our coastal seas and our oceans around Ireland. It concentrates on the collection, management, processing, analysis and use of marine data.
Well, the EMFAF programme is a 7-year programme, and it's really important for the future of our fisheries. It funds an awful lot of different institutes and people that are involved in the industry, such as the POs, the Navy, the department, and especially our scientists. And it provides funding for important projects that help secure a future for our fishermen.
In the Marine Institute, we implement the Irish EMFAF operational programme through a series of projects which we manage with the support of the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine. The projects supported and delivered under EMFAF are key enablers to gathering the scientific data and evidence needed to support the sustainable development of the blue economy, including fisheries and aquaculture, while enabling us to address challenges associated with climate change and biodiversity.
We've recently initiated 2 key programmes under the EMFAF Marine Knowledge Scheme. One relates to data and digital evidence services, and the second relates to climate impacts in coastal and marine waters.
The EU as a global ocean actor has a responsibility to protect our oceans and ensure that their resources are sustainably managed. In Ireland, a major producer of seafood, we will utilise EMFAF to achieve our collective goals, be that through food security with the supply of seafood products, growing our blue economy, and most importantly in supporting the livelihoods of our rural coastal communities who depend on clean oceans and seas.
The data covers the full range of marine activities. The availability of data services like this means that we can deliver on our national obligations like marine spatial planning, marine environment, offshore renewable energy, climate change and fisheries.
The EMFAF programme is co-funded by both the EU Commission and the Irish Government. The Minister for Agriculture, Food and the Marine and officials in his department have the responsibility for developing and implementing the EMFAF programme, which contains multiple schemes and projects. Those schemes and projects are then delivered by several state agencies, including the Marine Institute.
Food security in the marine sense means producing a sustainable supply of seafood while balancing consumer demand with the need to take care of our marine environment and our marine biodiversity. This work is really important. It's really important that the projects that the Marine Institute and other agencies perform under EMFAF gather the scientific evidence and data needed to inform all stakeholders and policymakers so that the right decisions are taken for our future.
The main priority for fisheries under the Marine Biodiversity Scheme is the fostering of sustainable fishing activities and also the protection and restoration of aquatic resources and biodiversity.
So the Marine Biodiversity Scheme under the EMFAF programme helps to align the objectives of the Common Fisheries Policy with wider environmental directive objectives, such as those in the Marine Strategy Framework Directive, Natura 2000 and Habitats and Birds Directive.
The main actions to support fostering sustainable fisheries would include actions to share data and information to stakeholders, also actions to increase awareness in marine biodiversity, habitat loss and the impacts of climate change, and further actions then to ensure protection and restoration of habitats under the Habitats Directive.
Well, the EMFAF programme runs over 7 years, so that supports the industry and everybody involved in the industry, including our scientists, for 7 years. It provides security for everybody that's involved in the industry, but it gives 7 years of time to work on the different projects that are needed to make sure that we're sustainable, that we're doing the right things, moving in the right direction, and ensuring that there's biodiversity and there's sustainability is built into everything that we do.
The Deepwater Species Project began in 2019. In this project, the Marine Institute is assessing the distribution and the abundance of deepwater species. The abundance of deepwater species has declined considerably over the last 20 years. The abundance of the species, although recovering, will take time. This is due to their slow maturing and their long lifespan. This project, however, will provide a great baseline and survey time series, which will be used to assess the development of any future fishery in this area. The data collected on this survey includes, but is not limited to, abundance, size distribution, and also spatial and depth distribution of the deepwater species. As an ecosystem survey, it also includes any associated communities such as fish assemblages and epibenthos. This information is then used to assess the species and produce advice for sustainable management, both on a national level and on an international level as well.
So to support environmental and/or Natura compliance, the Marine Institute was involved in several projects funded by EMFAF. One I would single out for mention is the one using the continuous plankton recorder. And this is a device that has been deployed since the 1950s in Irish waters. But the EMFAF funding allowed us for the first time in some years to re-establish the survey in Irish waters that had fallen into abeyance through lack of funding for a number of years. So that gives you a very long-term index of the abundance of those microscopic creatures that are the very basis of our food webs. At the other end of the scale then, we engage in survey work on mammals and birds and other higher animals, higher trophic level animals, that is to say animals that are at the top of the food chain. So we had surveys of birds and mammals conducted on our routine surveys that we conduct on the Celtic Explorer, the pelagic fish surveys for mackerel, for blue whiting, for herring, for boarfish. And the scientists involved in those projects have made those surveys really a multidisciplinary platform which allowed us to use the EMFAF funding to add an extra layer of information we didn't have before.
There are a number of projects within the Marine Institute working on restoration and conservation. These include the native oyster, the spiny lobster, also known as the marine crayfish. These projects include the development of fishing techniques which protect against the capture of threatened and protected species such as seals, marine mammals, rays and some species of skate.
It has been shown that our Irish waters have got some of the rarest skates and rays in the North Atlantic are present here. Work we did on egg case surveys to show the mermaid's purses. So these skates lay little eggs that wash up on the beach sometimes, and this is where we use the general public to establish where the hotspots for these things are. And that work, funded by EMFAF, conducted by Marine Dimensions, showed that there are a number of places where we have hotspots of very, very rare species. These are some of the rarest animals that exist in Europe. So this was all funded through EMFAF and wouldn't have been possible otherwise.
Well, it's really important that we as stakeholders are involved in projects and that we are working hand in glove with the agencies such as the Marine Institute to look at different species, protected species such as elasmobranchs, sharks, dolphins, whales, everything that's swimming in our seas that could be affected by fishing, to avoid them, minimise our contact with them, to make sure that they're still there and to help the biodiversity of our waters around the coastline.
It's great to take part because it's lovely to have input in this, and it gives us a great understanding of what's going on. And as fishermen we wouldn't understand what would be going on a whole pile, but with working with the Marine Institute it gives us a great intel of what is actually happening with their scientific studies.
Collaboration with industry is key in all of these projects. Where we succeed is where fishers, fisheries and scientists interact. That's where the fisheries are targeted, and that's what's really needed. These projects are really driven by the science, but also by the needs of the fishers themselves.
We fish in our areas, and it's great to understand our areas and to see what's going on underneath. And I suppose we wouldn't have an idea only for the scientific input from the Marine Institute, because it gives you an understanding of what the future, of how you can help with the future, and to see what's actually going on, because without that we won't have a future.
The outputs from the Marine Biodiversity Scheme help contribute to sustainable seafood production by helping to align the objectives between the environmental drivers and the common fisheries policy.
The main priority for the aquaculture sector under the Marine Biodiversity Scheme will be to ensure the environmental sustainability of the aquaculture sector over the lifetime of the programme, and also to protect marine biodiversity in habitat areas.
So aquaculture is the culture of fish and shellfish and seaweed in aquatic environments, both freshwater and marine, for the production of food from those environments. It's currently worth approximately 180 million euros and employs about 2,000 people in Ireland, mostly in coastal areas where it's a very important part of the coastal economy in those areas. There's approximately 300 production units in these areas around the coast of Ireland.
The Marine Institute supports the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine in aquaculture licensing by preparing a series of appropriate assessment reports which consider the effects or the likely effects of the proposed aquaculture activity on conservation features. And this mostly takes effect in these protected sites, these SACs and SPA sites.
Through core funding and supports from EMFF in the past and EMFAF in the future, we provide a range of services to the sector and also its regulation. We also test the oceanography of these areas, for instance looking at the water movements around installations and making sure that that is safe for the placement of these installations. Environmental services are also provided in the area of benthic, which is the seabed, checking the seabed underneath these fish farms. We also provide a range of services in the area of socioeconomics and fisheries interactions, and also importantly providing support for licensing of aquaculture installations. So we provide a lot of support and services to the department when it comes to licensing.
If an activity is considered significant, it means that that proposed activity may cause harm to a conservation feature. In order to overcome this, we may actually put into place a mitigation measures or some other measure to minimize that effect. An example of a mitigation measure would be perhaps to relocate the proposed activity or the structures away from a sensitive feature, maybe a seagrass bed or something like that. So you want to avoid the effect of the proposed activity. In Dungarvan Harbour, also in relation to birds interactions, we created, or allowed to be created, a very large swath up and down the shore, which removed all structures, and this allowed the birds then to move up and down freely with the tide to feed as the tide was coming in and out.
All aquaculture operations are subject to licence, and these are granted by the Minister of Agriculture, Food and the Marine. All of these licence applications are subject to review and the likely impact that they will have on aquatic environments. The reviews consider the interactions with habitats and species that are found in special areas of conservation and special protection areas that are protected by EU laws. These reviews are called appropriate assessments because they're relevant to the potential impact and the location of the proposed aquaculture developments.
The Marine Institute provides appropriate assessment reports for all licensing activities. Under the previous programme, the Marine Institute prepared reports in support of 1,200 aquaculture licence decisions. The new EMFAF will continue with the monitoring and assessment protocols that we've devised to date. and there'll be a particular emphasis still on looking at bird populations and bird usage of aquaculture sites. In addition, given the potential risks from climate change, we are also instigating a program around the coast looking at the proliferation of the Pacific oyster in certain areas. In certain instances where there might be a risk of reproduction of non-native species, including the Pacific oyster, which is a culture species, we have made recommendations to use particular strains of this species such that they will not reproduce, and reduces the risk then to the habitats and species in that area. There's a proposed research project to look at developing ecological carrying capacity models for shellfish aquaculture in bays and around the coast. This is to generate a system whereby we can look at the broader effects of these activities on biodiversity and also to maintain sustainability.